It's now my real privilege to introduce our speaker this morning, Linda Hart Green and her husband, Harry Green, retired and moved from New Jersey to Fernandina Beach in 2012 to be near the ocean and in a community with like-minded folks and an interesting history. Linda is a retired American Baptist minister, and Harry is a retired Unitarian Universalist minister. Linda says she taught him there is such a thing as progressive Christianity. Since retiring, Linda has pursued her love of art and is an accomplished pastel artist with a studio in Fernandina Beach. She is also involved in a number of volunteer and activist organizations in the community. In full disclosure, I will tell you, Linda is my sister-in-law and very dear friend. Her sermon this morning will reflect on the theme, We Are a People of Story, which is the May Soul Matters theme. And now we're going to change seats, so give us a second.
Hello again, friends at UUCJ. It's nice to be with you in this way. I'm happy to be speaking to you once again from Penny's computer and here in Fernandina, and saying hello to each and every one of you. Once upon a time. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He was an old man who fished alone in a skiff in the Gulf Stream and gone 84 days without taking a fish. A wandering Aramaean was my father. These are examples of the beginnings of stories that capture our attention. Can you think of the opening of one of your favorite stories? When a story begins in a way that grabs us, we settle in our seats and perk up our ears. We anticipate what will come next. Stories can evoke the full range of our emotions and help us make sense of this world and take us to other worlds. The stories that connect us to people and places, often where we first heard them. Maybe for you around a campfire, at a dining room table, in a circle on the floor of a library, at the bedside of a loved one. Can you think of a special story place in your experience? My maternal grandmother was my babysitter. She was widowed in her 60s, but lived into her mid-90s. So she lived those last remaining 30 years with my grandmother and grandfather. And so she was my babysitter before I went to school. She was 78 when I was born. And I would sit next to her on the sofa in our family home, close enough to smell her flowery talcum powder. She wore clean, pressed house dresses, and her hair wasn't all the way gray, and it was thick and curly, and she had to pin it back from her face. She wore thin, wire-rimmed glasses over watery blue eyes. She was a calm and quiet person, and so she was a good influence on a wiggly and very verbose little girl. Could that have possibly been me? She was not widely traveled, but she was well read, and she loved the National Geographic magazines. So I would sit next to her and we would turn the pages and create stories of the adventures we would take. One day we would be on a safari in Africa. Another day we were haunting the museums of Europe. Maybe you can think of a storyteller in your family or in your life. I think popular interest in ancestry research reflects a disconnect of modern people to the larger world and their larger context. Because our lives are so centered in now and they go so quickly. We like technology and innovation, and we think we're so advanced that history has nothing to teach us. And many people move away from their childhood or ancestral homes. They don't live near multiple generations of their family, except in some ethnic communities. But knowing your family story can be a powerful tool for self-understanding. Anyone who watches Henry Louis Gates on Finding Your Roots sees celebrities brought to tears by the things that are unearthed about their stories. Personally, I was always very curious about my father's extended family because we were disconnected from them. My father's parents were older when he was born. He was the fifth of 5 children, and they both died before I was 1. One time I asked my mom why there were no pictures of me with them, and did they ever hold me? And she said, no, they never did. After my grandparents passed, there was a terrible split between my father and his sisters over their estate, and that put a permanent rift among them. And my father didn't speak about his family and was not interested in my prying questions when I persisted in asking them. So the only things I had to go on were very few strained family visits over the years in order to try to put together a picture of what they must have been like. I was very intrigued by this theme for the month of May. What does it mean to be a people of story? So as you can probably already tell, my focus for you today is on guiding you toward your story to help you be able then to find your place in a people of story. Why do I think this is so important for you? Well, the field of narrative psychology tells us that stories give structure to our experience and to our personalities. Dan McAdams teaches at Northwestern University, and he says stories give our lives a cognitive script. I think that's a very descriptive term, a cognitive script that help us understand how we came to be the way we are and where we think our lives are going. And this contributes to our sense of meaning and purpose in the world. Courtney Peppernell puts this concept more personally. You can't skip chapters. That's not how life works. You have to read every line, meet every character. You will not enjoy all of it. Heck, some chapters will make you cry for weeks. You will read things you don't want to read. You will have moments when you don't want the pages to end. But you have to keep going. Stories keep the world revolving. Live yours. Don't miss out. So here are 3 things. Yes, I'm a pastor who lists 3 things. Can't help it. Here are 3 things I would like you to try to remember and take with you today. Your story has an understory. A good story listener asks good questions, and stories can expand our understanding of what it means to be human. First, your story has an understory. Now, the understory is not the glossy highlights, the movie trailer version of your life. Oh no, it's what's really going on with you. What makes you tick? What makes you do what you do, who you are, what you value, and why. My church book group just finished the book High Conflict by Amanda Ripley, just came out in April. And in this book, she records an anecdote of a couple who were in divorce counseling, and they were fighting, get this, over a crock pot, custody of their crock pot. And what was even odder is they never even used it. Neither of them even liked to cook. Finally, in the midst of all of this, the husband asked the wife, why? Why in the world did she want this crock pot? And she told him the story of how in her family growing up, the crock pot in their kitchen represented the warmth of their home. And that was the kind of home she and her husband were never able to create together. And this made her sad. Well, this story made him sad too. And he realized that the only reason he wanted the crock pot was because she wanted the crock pot. But once they understood where they were coming from, they could at least begin to loosen their defenses a little bit and understand what had brought them to this place in life. You know, if you leave out the understory, you leave out big chunks of what makes you you. Now, I completely understand that it's very difficult to share your understory without a level of trust and a willingness to risk. However, the flip side of that is, if you only let people know the movie trailer version of you, you might wind up being kind of lonely and feeling isolated. Padre Otwama is someone whose poetry I love and respect. He's obviously Irish from his name. And on a recent TEDx talk, he translated the word trust from the Gaelic. As many of you who know Irish culture and poetry know, Irish people take lots of words to translate one word. And he tells us that trust in Gaelic is translated like this: you are the place I stand when my feet are sore. Trust is, you are the place I stand when my feet are sore. So if you can't trust, you might wind up with sore feet all the time. And that would be sad. Your story has an understory. And a good story listener asks good questions. In the crockpot example, we heard that the husband finally got around to asking his wife why she wanted the crockpot. Mediators call this going down the why trail. You have to listen. You have to listen to the other person's whys and then ask more clarifying questions. And again, more questions until they say you've got it right, not until you think you've got it right, until they say you've got it right. Is this a painstaking process? Oh, yes, and it takes a long time, but it helps us not overreact to what we perceive another person's point of view to be. And isn't that far too much going on in our world today? We think we know what other people think when we've never really asked them about it. I would like to give you just a few other very simple story listener questions that you can ask and remember. 1, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? Will you tell me more about yourself? Or what happened next? And what happened after that? And yes, being a good story listener means hearing things we don't want to hear. Those who have not been heard due to racial, ethnic, or gender-based biases have stories full of pain, and they need to be able to have a safe place to share them. Just in terms of racially biased culture stories that we have lived in recently, we hear stories out of the Black Lives Matter movement of police brutalities. We hear stories of enslavement from the 1619 Project, and we read about the potent problems that slavery put upon a people for survival in the book, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and the subsequent show that's on now about that book. So it's up to us. We can cling to a narrow and exclusive story of why things are the way they are, or we can listen well and hear a completely different story. Yes, this is hard work, but it's well worth it. And a lot depends on the attitude you bring to your willingness to listen. Your story has an understory. Being a good story listener means asking good questions. And stories can expand our idea of what it means to be human. I'll refer to Padre Gautama again. He now is associated with Krista Tippett and the On Being Project. You may listen regularly to that. Before this, he collaborated with and was in charge of the Corrymeela community in Ireland, which is Ireland's oldest organization for peacemaking and reconciliation. In a recent TEDx talk that I referenced, he told the example of a very bright 11-year-old girl at a school he was chaplain for in Belfast, who one day looked right at him and asked him honestly, "Why did God make Protestants? I hate them." The only story she knew or was ever told had completely permeated her consciousness. And so he gently and painstakingly tried to get her to see that there was another story that was equally as valuable. Openness and curiosity help us become more human as we learn about the complexity of others' stories. Yes, we have to unlearn a lot of things, like this young girl did, and also learn new stories alongside of them. But stories can expand our understanding. We need them. They widen our curiosity about ourselves and about others, and they fire up our imaginations of what could be. What could be if we were good story listeners? I don't know about you, but I simply can't forget the very simple and poignant scene in the movie version of the book, The Help, when Viola Davis, who played the maid Abilene, says to her little charge, "You is kind, you is smart, you is important." How different would our society be today if we listened to each other's stories with compassion and curiosity? Would our hurting world hurt just a little less? Dear friends, let your story live. Let your story live in all its pain and splendor. Because, as you well know, it's not about the crock pot. And when someone is courageous enough and willing to risk enough to share their story with you, ask good questions. Listen well and be changed, enriched, challenged, expanded, and made more human. May it be so. Amen.